Since we have more attendance, so we need to give some introduction. We have the concept that it's called samuch, and we have the concept that is called mufne. We're going to use it many times today. So let's understand the concept. We'll start first and foremost with the Mishnah. The Mishnah gave us a list of 15 categories of women that have a issue that is called arayot. Arayot mean a biblical prohibition against have any type of relation with them. In that list we have a relation with father, daughter, brother, sister, and we go further with different category of immediate family, blood relatives, relatives that relate toward a marriage, and we explain that there are two categories. The blood relatives, the closest to a person, is the first category. The next category is someone who's connected to a person toward marriage, such as a wife of his son, as an example. And we go further with the act of levirate marriage, which is relation that come toward a passing of a brother that wasn't in a living while he passed. Meaning, as we explained several times, unfortunately you saw it many times in Israel, a young soldier died that would just get married. He's at his early 20s. The parents are still young. They have another child that was born after his passing. And we discussed the issue of act of levirate marriage, which is potential redeeming the soul of the deceased by not having a continuation in his life, by trying to have it within the form of family. And the issue is that this brother was not alive when his oldest brother died. We go further with the idea of tzarot and tzarat tzarot, which we discuss the concept of rivals, and we learn the differentiation between ייבום and וחליצה, and we explain why we need both. ייבום is a act of levirate marriage. וחליצה is releasing by having this act, the symbol of the shoe and speeding, etc. And we ask a question, so how come we use the word potrot, meaning the exempt? And we explain that the source is achot isha, the sister of the wife, and because the Torah very prudent with every word, especially the word aleha that looks superfluous, so we learn the concept that it's called binyan av. Binyan av, which means we explained earlier that there are conflicted texts. In one place you see in Deuteronomy 25 that give us the idea of mitzvah of levirate marriage. On the other hand, we have a line in Vayikra, in Leviticus chapter 18, that prohibited a relation between a man and his sister-in-law. And we ask a question. In one hand the Torah called it an abomination, on the other hand the Torah said that it's a mitzvah to redeem the soul of the deceased by marrying the wife, the surviving wife of the deceased. And we reconcile basically the idea of binyan av. And the idea is, we learn there is a one concept that is called aseh, meaning a positive commandment. You have another one that is lo taseh, as we all know. The Torah has 613 commandments, and out of them we have 365 positive and 248 negative. So if you have conflicted text, which is conflicted mitzvot, you have, for example, positive versus negative that speaks about one subject, that make the exception that the positive override negative. And we go further to say binyan av, binyan, which means you derive this foundation from one source, that you can go ahead for the entire places in the Torah, you derive that. How? Because in one hand the Torah said Yevamah yavo elea, which means we learn that this a prohibition of daughter-in-law, mother-in-law, etc. And we learn from which we call smichut. What is smichut? Smichut meaning when you have two texts who are attached to each other. You learn the idea that mitzvah of tzitzit, okay, that the Torah commanded us to put fringes on the corner of our garments, and then you see next to that it's written the mitzvah of sha'atnez. Sha'atnez is a prohibition of wearing a clothing that contain wool and linen together. And we ask a question, how come it's written in attachment to each other? And we derive from that that there is a positive commandment that overrides negative commandment. So here we see the concept of samuch, and is another concept we learn from the word mufne. Mufne meaning when you have a space, meaning you see a text and you understand all the text and it's left something there, for example, gdilim or all kind of text that it's left open, you derive from that exegesis, which means you derive from that a drasha to something else. Now, we are on page 5. Teinach letana devei Rabbi Ishmael lerabanan menalehu. So here we ask a question. You are good with the whole concept of positive aseh, doche lo ta'aseh, override negative commandment from the attachment of mitzvat tzitzit and sha'atnez. Since it's written one next to the other, it looks like superfluous in addition. So this come to teach us that according to Rabbi Ishmael, beged, when you use the term beged, meaning a garment, it means can be either wool or linen. So it means when the Torah used the word tzemer upishtim, wool and linen, it looks like superfluous. Lerabanan, that disputed Rabbi Ishmael, and they hold that any time the Torah used the word beged, meaning garment, it's not specifically for wool or linen, and you need from that to learn those species that it's a mixture of several. So menalehu, how do you know that the positive commandment override negative one? The way that we explain is Rashi's way. Tosfot have a whole explanation who are those sages who disputed Rabbi Ishmael. Nafkalehu merosho. Now we go to a total new direction. We try to go by the idea of metzora, a leper. What is the leper? We have a biblical chapter in the book of Vayikra, in Leviticus chapter 13. And over there, it's a situation that someone have, which we call in the modern day, some types of hepatitis infections, which is a dermatological issue, meaning that a person have all kind of appearance on his skin, and he goes to a certain process of purification The Torah said at the seventh day he need to shave all of his hair, his head, his beard, his eyelids, etc. And then, but the question is, the Torah used all kind of specification, and then the Torah said, and the entire hair, ve'et kol se'aro yegaleach, everything he needs to shave. Looks superfluous. De Tanya, we try to understand what the Torah meant in Leviticus chapter 13, verse 9. Rosho, that he need to shave his head. Ma Talmud lomar, what we learn. You said that yegalach, we should take the whole of his hair. So since you say you need to take all of his hair, for sure you meant to say also his hair that was on his head, right? So lefi shene'emar, because it's written in a different chapter, in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 27, Lo takifu pe'at roshchem, the Torah prohibited, put a special warning, not to take the side lock, the entire hair of the person. Shomea ani af metzoraken, I may learn by analogy that since in both cases the Torah speaks about hair, so the same way as just the average person are prohibited to take that side lock, then the same apply to a leper, and you do not need an extra line to specify the prohibition against taking hair of the leper, the mitzvah of taking the hair of the leper. Talmud lomar, so therefore the Torah said the word rosho, that it means he have the commandment also to shave the side lock of his head. That mitzvat aseh, that the positive commandment of the leper, override the prohibition of not taking off the side lock. Let me make sure that we all understand that. We have two different texts in the book of Vayikra. One text tells us that the leper needs, in the process of purification, to take all his hair. But the Torah there goes to a specification. The Torah tells us he needs to take the hair of his head and the hair of, etc. They go the whole details over the body of a leper. And we ask why you need it. When you said it once, then it's applied to everything. And the idea, the notion, it's because you have another chapter that speaks generally about a person. And that chapter said in Leviticus 19, that tells us that we are prohibited from taking the side lock. Now we may think that therefore whatever the leper needs to take off at the process of healing, it's not including the side lock, because we see in a different chapter that is prohibited. Therefore we learn by this concept that the positive commandment override the negative, that when it's come to a leper, it's override the prohibition against taking off the side lock, and the leper needs to take everything, all of his hair, and that's the reason why we go to the specification and a general principle. V'kas savar hai Tana. So the Tana needs to explain to us, hakafat kol harosh shma hakafa. When you, in a sense, like we go soon to Simchat Torah, right? We do hakafot, we're circling around, right? So the idea, if you go around the entire head, and the Torah tells us, Lo takifu pe'at roshchem, you shall not go and shave the entire head, meaning the sidewalk included. So since the Torah used the word pe'ah is like the side, okay, like payas, right? So that the idea is to be scrupulous, not to take off the side, meaning to leave there a hair. So therefore, the Torah, if the Torah used the word rosho when it's come to a leper, we may mistakenly thinking that even we say that it's a mitzvah for him to take off all his hair. That's not included the side of his head. Why? Because by shaving it, he is in violation. Is something that Torah said not. So therefore we learn binyan av. Binyan av meaning you learn from one place for the entire Torah that the positive commandment override negative commandment. Just remember that this is a notion. We are going to refute it. Ika lemifrach. We can challenge that idea of binyan av. Again, binyan av is a concept here of positive commandment that override negative commandment, that try to spread and learn it for the entire Torah. We said, ma lelav dehakafa. There is a leniency in that prohibition of shaving. Shteken lav she'en shave bakol. That applies solely for men, not for women. Versus when you try to juxtapose back to our original subject, which is relation with the sister of his wife, that's applied for both, for men and women, which means that even we learn the prohibition against taking the sidelock, and it's override for the positive. You cannot derive from that every one, because you see that there are differences. So ela atya mizkano. Now we go to a different one. What's the different one? We try to learn from the idea of when the leper need to shave part of the shaving in a process of healing, he needs to take off his beard. So the Torah said the Tanya, zkano, when the Torah used the word beard, ma Talmud lomar. So why we need to say also his beard? Because again, you use the word yegalach, he should shave, et kol searo, his all of his hair. So we understand when you tell someone to take off all his hair, the beard is included. Lefi shene'emar, because the Torah said in a different location, in Leviticus 21, uf'ad zkanam lo yegalechu, the Torah prohibited the Kohanim to shave their beard. Shomea ani, I may derive from that, af kohen metzoraken, that applies also to a priest, a kohen that is a leper. So it means that it will be a prohibition to shave his sidelock of his beard and not the rest of his hair. Talmud lomar zkano. So we derive from that kohen who is leper, he has the mitzvah to shave also his beard. Why? Because the positive commandment of metzorah, of a leper, the shaving, override the prohibition that of shaving his beard. Again, let's make sure that we all understand it. The Kohen in one location are prohibited to shave his beard. In a different location, if he's a leper, he needs to shave all of his. The idea here that a positive commandment, which is to see him shave all his hair, override the negative commandment of he should not shave his beard. ואם אינו עניין ללאו שאין שווה בכל. So since this word come to teach us a negative commandment that not applies to everyone, and it's override for the positive commandment, because you derive that from the word rosho, meaning his head, תנאו עניין השווה בכל. So you derive from that all. והקטה הצטריך. And we need also the idea of beard for its own reason. Why? Salka da'ata chamina. You may think shane kohanim. Kohanim are different, which means that there are stringencies in the kohanim. What? Ho'il veriba bahem hakatuv mitzvot yeteirot. Since the Torah wants the kohanim to be sanctified, and there are many commandments that applies to them, afilu lav she'ein shaveh bakol lo dachi, which means this positive commandment override those prohibition that not applies to everyone. Kamash melan, so therefore we learn from the word zkano, his beard, the dachi, that it's override the mitzvah of a shaving of a leper, that again it's allowed. So here you see the way that the Rashba and the Ritva explain to us that even this love, this negative commandment of the Kohanim, override by the mitzvah of tiglachat, of shaving. Ela atya merosho dehach tana. We learn it, the word rosho is head, that applies to the mitzvah of leper, which is the Tanya. Rosho, ma Talmud lomar. When they use the Torah, use the word shaving his hair. What they want to tell us? Again, we already said yegalach et kol se'aro. He should shave all of his hair. So why you need to say his head? Lefi shene'emar, because the Torah tells us in regard to Nazirite in the book of Numbers chapter 6, ta'ar lo ya'avor al rosho, which means that the Nazirite are prohibited to shave his head hair. Shome'ani af metzora v'nazir ken. We may learn from that it also applies to a leper and Nazirite, that he may prohibited to shave all of his hair when he made this shaving of your purification. Talmud lomar, so we derive from the word rosho that even metzora, leper and nazir need to shave his head. Ika lemifrach, we can derive from that. Ma lenazir metzora sheken yeshno beshe'ela. This is very important. If someone is make a vow, so what we said in general, a person should not involve with vows, right? But if it turns that someone did commit himself by saying certain vows, so he can go before Chacham, before a sage, and the sage try to find a way to be out of that vow. How? So the idea is, for example, the sage said to him, if you know that this will create so and so, that you still hold that vow. So it's called petach. You find it in the, if you remember, we studied it in Chagigat, page 10, that either you go before 3 hedyotot, 3 basic people who are knowledgeable in Torah, or 1 sage, and since the prohibition of shaving the hair of the Nazir can be uprooted by a sage, so therefore it's, you see that positive can override the negative. So you see here that you have in one hand the lav ta'ar lo ya'avor al rosho, correct, and versus metzora that it's only one aseh. The ilotei mahachi, that if you don't say so, which means you do not derive from that to the idea of shaving the head of the Nazirite. Ha kaimelan, we know the en aseh doche lo ta'aseh va'aseh. So you see it, for example, on Tractate Shabbat, page 25. At the very top of page 25, in Tractate Shabbat, they give an example that you have a series of mitzvot, and you see that the positive commandment will not override a prohibition that combine positive and negative. Ligmar mi nazir, you learn from nazir that is also a leper, that you have here the positive commandment override negative and positive, because you have the mitzvah of shaving, that it's override, as we explained, the prohibition of shaving his hair, and therefore you see ela minazir maitama lo gamrin. And why you do not derive this analogy from nazir? The same idea that he can go before the sage, bedin or sage, and can be abrogated, can be annulled. So before we continue, let's wrap up our understanding so far. Make sure we all get it clear. We learn in the Mishnah. We have 15 categories of women that it's considered relation with them, it's considered arayot, it's prohibited. And the Mishnah used the word exempt. So the exempt applied to what? To tzara and tzarat tzarata, which called co-wife or co-wife. And we explained examples, if you remember in the past days. A simple example is the biblical story of Jacob, right? Jacob has the two sisters, right? It's before the giving of the Torah. So you have Leah, and imagine you have a first son, Reuven, and then you have a son from Rachel, from Rachel. The first one is Yosef. And now the issue is that they are brothers from their father and not from their mother. And we explained the whole idea of act of Levirate marriage applies only to brothers from father, not from mother. So now you see, if Reuven passed and he married, for example, to a Dinah, just for our understanding, or not use Dinah, let's use a different Esther, right? If you marry Esther and Esther is childless, now Yosef is the brother from the father, not from the mother. He is now, the idea of Levirate, of ייבום, applies to him, right? So we learn the concept of ייבום, and we also learn the concept of if it's a refusal, then they have the act of moving the shoes, etc. And we ask a question, why we use the word potrot, exempt, and you don't use the other, that which is prohibited, and we derive from the source of achot isha, the sister of his wife, that the Torah used the word aleha, and it looks superfluous, and we said that when it's a mekom mitzvah lo tikach, you should not take. So this is a concept of binyan av. Binyan av meaning isur erva, the prohibition of arayot, of the prohibited certain illicit relation, is not fulfill the mitzvah of ייבום, meaning, and we explained it several times, the conflicted texts. One place said that you are prohibited from relation of the sister of your wife, and I'm sorry, the wife of your brother, and the other one, it speaks about the mitzvah of Levirate. So when you have the issue of illicit relation, that override the mitzvah of Levirate marriage. So we explain this is a lo ta'aseh, and you tell me it's a mitzvah. So you explain the several explanations. The first one is aseh doche lo ta'aseh, positive override negative, because you said yevama yavo alea, the surviving brother. So they said that there are certain concept of arayot in the second decree and the third decree, and we explain that we differentiate between blood and relation that comes as a result of bethrowing someone in a family, such as daughter-in-law, mother-in-law, etc. Now, how do you derive this source of positive override negative? The source is the mitzvah of tzitzit, and we learn because tzitzit is attached to sha'atnez, and tzitzit is a mitzvah to put in every corner of the garments, not every garments, but the main garments we're wearing a tzitzit. And in attachment we have the mitzvah of not wearing a linen and wool together. So you derive from the attachment that's called simuchin. Then we use the word gdilim, meaning even when it's a place of sha'atnez, aseh doche lo ta'aseh, meaning when you put this fringe, that it's a blue one, and it's basically from the other one you have a wool and linen, you have here positive that override negative. So we ask, how about Rabbi Yehuda? So that by the way is follow Rabbi Yehuda, that he derived that simuchin. So you see it in one place in Parashat Shlach. Parashat Shlach you have the mitzvah of tzitzit, and then you have the mitzvah of gdilim is in a Deuteronomy, in Dvarim. So you derive from that smichut, from that idea that mufne, that it left to derive a drasha exegesis. That's Tana de Rabbi Ishmael, beged, you learn tzemer upishtim, you learn wool and linen. So you learn that applies to all nig'ei bgadim, to all different type of garment. You see in the Vayikra, in Leviticus, the sha'atnez, from this verbal analogy, from gzera shava, mufne. So this all good by Rabbi Ishmael. How about Rabbanan, the sages? We said beged, every clothing, it's included everyone. So you derive it from learning of leper. How you learn it from a leper? We said that this is a positive commandment that override negative. But you see again that it's not applies to every case. So we refuted it. Then we learn it from Nazir and from Metzorah. And we said, again, you have here positive aseh, doche lo ta'aseh ve'aseh, because you have ta'ar, you have the idea of shaving, vegadel par aseh. So you go backward to the original source, which is smichut, tzitzit le'sha'atnez. Now, it's very important for us to know, ela le'olam, 5b, mikra kama, we learn it from this attachment of tzitzit and shatnez. We go back to the original idea. Im ken lemakrat tzitzit ta'aseh lecha gdilim lamali. So why do you use the word gdilim instead of tzitzit? Let's go on the text. We said it every day, right? In the morning, in the evening. It's book of Bamidbar, book of Numbers, chapter 15. They said, ve'asu lahem tzitzit, they shall make for themselves tzitzit, ve'natnu al tzitzit hakanaf, and then vaya lachem letzitzit. So, why you need the word gdilim ta'aseh lach in dvarim? So, the Meiri explains that because the word gdilim, it's written in 5 letters, Gimel Dalet Lamed Yud Mem Sofit. Tzitzit, you have 4, Tzadik Yud, Tzadik Taf. So it looks like missing the one Yud. So you derive Shema Mina le'afnuyei. So it's open for us to learn another concept, which is that mitzvah tzitzit, the commandment of tzitzit, override the prohibition of mixture of wool and linen. And that's we learn for all the other mitzvot in the Torah. So the Gemara challenger said, Ha leshiura udeata. This come to teach us of how many string, right? You need to have in a tzitzit. So it's not a yitur, a superfluous point to teach that the one connect to the other. How? You have gdil shnayim, which means the minimum when you use the gdil has to be minimum of 2 string. Why? Because how do you put it together? You need to have 2 string to put them together. Gdilim, when you use the plural, which means that they have to be 2 string of 2. Arba'a, so they are together. In each corner, you have 1, so it's a 4, right? So aseh gdil, you go and take 1 from these 4, which is you put together and it's turned to be 8, and that's the way Rashi explained. You make the gdil upotleo metucho. So you do at the end from this one. You have 1/3 is kesher, is the knot, and 2/3 is the string. So im ken lemakra lo tilbash shatnez tzemer upishtim, without the word yachdav together, because even without that you understand that if you have a mixture of wool and linen, yachdav lamali, it looks superfluous. Shema mina le'afnuyei. So lidrosh smuchim, that you have this space, this superfluous point to teach us other things. והקטה מבא אלי לתוכב שתי דחיפות, חיבור ודחיפה אחת אינו חיבור. Which means someone who does it, if you do it less than 2, so that's the learning. So why you need the word יחדיו? אם כן לכתוב רחמנה לא תלבש צמר ופשתים שעטנז למה לי? So let's think together. If the Torah said you should not wear wool and linen, why you need the word shatnez? You derive from not wearing wool and linen the concept of shatnez. Shema mina le'afnuyei. It means that the Torah give us a space to derive, how do you call it, drasha, exegesis, right? That's the idea.
Further expound on it.
Further expound.
Come to a conclusion.
We derive from that, and by the way, all of that we discuss in Tractate Menachot. There is a long explanation over there, and the idea is Ad sheyehesh shua tavui venuz. So you help me with the English. I'll say it in my very best, and Kat and David and Gil, all of you try to translate it properly. I first go by the Rashi. Rashi tells us there is concept that is called tzemer bishat gziza, when you're taking off from the animal the
shearing.
What's shearing? Thank you, shearing. So you have this pishtan, this part that wool, right? You take it bishat katzir, when you harvesting, when you're taking it, and then you do niputz and tviya and ariga, which is a 3 different concept. You what do you say?
Smooth it.
First, what do you do? What's
Smooth
the
it. The first thing is you smooth it.
Smooth it?
Smooth it, yeah.
And then the next one is?
Spin it.
Spin it, and then the next
you weave it.
Weave it, thank you. So that's, according to Rashi, considering diverse kind. That's kil'ayim, according to Rashi. Rabbeinu Tam refuse it, and others refuse Rashi, but I'm just going by the way Rashi explained it with notrikon. That's the sha'atnez. The 3 thing in Hebrew it's called shua, shoa, tavui, nuz.
Right.
That's the 3. It combine the 3, you use the word sha'atnez. Ela kula mi sha'atnez nafka. So now you the proper word is kil'aim, is diverse. But we derive all of that from the word sha'atnez, so we derive this shua, tavui, venuz. And now, here is the beauty of all of that. That by having the sha'atnez and tzitzit looks like superfluous, we derive from that the whole concept of binyan av. Let's make sure, Elliot. Binyan av. What is binyan av?
When you build something, a father building, like when you have malachas on Shabbos, it's the main malacha.
But binyan av for the entire Torah. What do you learn from one place, binyan av for the whole Torah?
You learn from one place and from another place.
How?
Because you learn from a pasuk and then you...
So we just said it. It's because this is the second principle of Rabbi Ishmael.
Yeah, it is.
The idea is that when you have attachment of the mitzvah of tzitzis to the mitzvah of shatnez, right? Because it's attached to each other, you derive from that aseh dochel lo taseh, the positive commandment override negative commandment, which is you have the negative commandment of what?
You can't wear shatnez.
You can't wear shatnez.
You can have this.
Excellent. So that's the point. In general,
wool talis, but you can have linen tzitzis.
Good. I'm proud of Elliot. It's good. So in one hand, it's prohibited to wear something that have mixture of wool and linen. Yet, because the Torah attached the text of tzitzit to the text of shatnez, both of them speaks about garments, we derive binyan av, a concept that applies to the entire Torah, that the positive commandment, when it's conflicted with a negative commandment, the positive commandment overrides the negative one. Okay? Now, what is connected to us? Back to our subject. We learn that we have the mitzvah aseh, the positive commandment of ייבום, of Levirate marriage, to marry the wife of the surviving brother, needs to marry the wife of the deceased. And that overrides the prohibition of what? Of others. Now the question is, how far you override? Because you have a prohibition of what? Of daughter-in-law, for example, daughter, etc., all of that. So you derive from that, binyan av achot isha, the sister of the wife, lo tikach, the Torah said you should not marry. Ashkechan de'at te'aseh v'dachel lo ta'aseh greida, which is not involved karet, regular one. Lo ta'aseh sheyesh bo karet, heicha de'ashkechan de'dachi. Where we found that the positive override negative, the istrich aleha lemeisra, that we have the prohibition of the marrying the sister of the wife, that's Leviticus 18, that it's prohibited even the place that you have to do a ייבום. And we explained many times that the sister of a wife, in one hand, it looks like a mitzvah. On the other hand, we say that it's prohibited. So, now we have 3 different attempts. The first one, we try to learn it from the law of Brit Milah, the circumcision. Ma lemilah sheken nichretu ala 13 britot. The Torah said 13 times the word Brit. You see it in Leviticus chapter, in the Bereshit, in Genesis chapter 17. The Torah used the word, when Hashem talked to Abraham, they use Brit, the word Brit, 13 times. And that's the way Rashi elaborates on that, and also you see it in the Tosfot Yom Tov over there in Nedarim, page 3. So verses are the positive commandment. So since if we found in a mitzvah of Brit Milah that it's so strong that it's override other negative commandment that is involved with karet, you cannot drive all the others. So take for example Shabbat. Shabbat you have the negative commandment lo ta'aseh melacha. You should not do work. So that's involved with both karet and skila. The Tosfot, the truth is, we don't have time. The Tosfot on page 6a, it's in Dibur Matchil Nigmar. Tosfot said, he asked when it's come to Shvita in Shabbat, just give you the idea. he said 2 lines from the large line. ואם תאמר ואיך נגמר מאחד דלא דין מהשנה אחד דעה ויעשה ולא תעשה. So it's the Rashba and Aruch Laner involved with this. Anyway, back to our subject. So we have a say that positive that override negative that involved with correct. So we rejected the second option, mi Pesach. We try to learn from the mitzvah of Paschal lamb, that the mitzvah is to slaughter it on the 14th day of the month of Nisan. That's override the prohibition of doing work on Shabbat, even that it's involved with the punishment of karet. You cannot say Male Pesach. You can say Gam on Pesach that there is a part of stringency sheken karet, because the Torah said that soul shall be cut off if you don't do it, versus other positive commandments. So therefore, if you found the mitzvah of offering of Pesach that it's much stringent, that it's override a negative commandment involved with karet, you cannot derive from that all the other mitzvot. Now the rejection of the third idea is the tamid, mitamid. We have a daily offering. The Torah said shnei tmidin kehil chatam, right? That's apply also on Shabbat. Ma letamid sheken tadir. What is that tadir? Tadir meaning that you have it frequent. Don't take it wrong. Doesn't mean that it's because it's every day. It means that you have some routine. You do it in a manner of routine all the time. So you see here, for example, Musfei Shabbat, the Musaf, the additional offering of Shabbat and the Chag, or you have it in the Sfirat HaOmer, right? So that's override Shabbat. Today it's not relevant. Lo badu Pesach, but in Mitzvah Hashem, when the Beis Hamikdash will be built soon, right? So you go al pi re'iyah, which means that you go by the ability that Chag HaShavuot can be on Shabbat. Tosfot said that you cannot, דיבור המתחילו מכולו, ואם תאמר ונלך משאר קורבנות דחי שבת, so Tosfot said, ואומר אידה חשיבי התם כולו, so it's not all the time, but anyway, that's not applies to the idea of ייבום. מאחד הלא התתת מיתרתי, מה תיתי ממילה או פסח שכן כרת, and you see that we're running out of time, מפסח ותמיד, שכן צורך גבוה. The third objection, ממילה ותמיד שכן ישנו לפי הדיבור, ואליבא דמן אמר, שעולה שהקריבו ישראל במדבר, עולה תמיד הווה. That was a daily offering they brought. So therefore, we rejected also the other option, ומכולו נמה שכן ישנן לפי הדיבור, because all of that happened before the receiving the Torah, versus other mitzvot, such as the Levirite. So it means that we cannot learn from those mitzvot that override Shabbat, like Brit Milah, like Pesach, like Tamid, for other mitzvot, like ייבום, because it's also override by the idea that that it's involved with karet. So back to our question, what we derive from the word aleha, אלא יצטריך, we need it, כסקה לתך אמינתיתם מכיבוד אבהם. You may compare it or learn it from the positive commandment of honoring father and mother. The Tanya יכול יהיה כיבוד אבהם דוחה שבת, so that if the father or mother ask you to do something that it's in violation of Shabbat, you may think, come on, I need to honor my parents, and my parents ask me to violate Shabbat, so I have to honor my parents, and it's more important than Shabbat. Talmud lomar, we derive from the pasuk in Leviticus 19, verse 3, Ish imo ve'aviv tirau ve'ed shabtotai tishmoru. You should revere your father and your mother. By the same token, you should observe my Shabbat. Kulchem chayavim bikvodi. All of you, your father, your mother, have to owe me, meaning the Almighty, my honor.
Yeah,
so therefore,
Hashem's commandments, even the parents tell you to violate.
Excellent. And even the parents you tell you to violate Shabbat, you do not honor their wishes, because that's in violation of what Hashem asks you. So there is a certain borderline between what the parent asks you that you have to fulfill. If they ask you the same manners, if your parents ask you to kill, to steal, you don't need to listen to them. The same manners, if your parents ask you to violate Shabbat, you don't learn from that. So how do you derive from that? So they said, my love, the amar leishchot li basheli. So if the father said, slaughter for me, cook for me, that this, the Torah said that that's a violation involved with karek, Vetama, the reason, because the honoring parents not override this, the katav rachmana ve'et shabtutai tishmaru, halavachi dachi. If the Torah did not say that line, you may think it's override. So the Gemara rejected that. It said, no. Page 6, lav de mechamer. Mechamer is the prohibition against moving the animal, that it's involved with a negative commandment that it's not have the karet. So the Gemara said, "Vafilu ache lo dachi." That's also the mitzvah not override. That's prohibition. Ela de kaimalan de ate aseh v'dachi lo taseh ligmar meicha de lo dachi. So the Gemara rejected that too. V'chitema de shani lav de shabbat de chamire ve'at tana be'alma kai ve'lo kaparich. So we continue that tomorrow. I just want for those who come late to re-emphasize the question that people asked me yesterday and day before yesterday, the point of Abba Shaul. In a practical manner, the chief rabbinate of Israel, as a good example, decided not to implement the idea of ייבום in our days. Even you see Yemenite Jews that came to Israel and they did it in the earliest time. It's because Abba Shaul said that the Torah put a list of abominations. We mentioned that in Yom Kippur in Leviticus chapter 18. And all of that applied to any relation of a considered second or third blood relatives. And therefore the whole mitzvah of Levirate, meaning to redeem the soul of the deceased, applies solely if the intent is to redeem the soul. But the challenge Abba Shaul said is, when you have a person that carries in his mind other motivations, such as he wants her money, he wanted her to watch over his children, he wants her because of her body or her beauty or something else, then he's in violation. And Abba Shaul go further to say that the baby that come out of that relation, it's close to the concept of mamzer, which means illegitimate, not illegitimate, but what is the word, bastard, something like that.
Right.
That's not proper child. So therefore, because of that, the chief rabbinate of Israel come out that the whole Levirate marriage cannot be fulfilled at this point, since it's a high chance that most of the men who are willing to go ahead and marry the surviving brother married to the widow will not be purely in order to, like the Onan and Er in the book of Bereshit, the sons of Yehuda, that not intend Onan married Tamar for her body, her beauty, and not for redeeming the soul of the deceased. So the Yemenite Jews did it at earliest time when they immigrated to Israel, but they're no longer doing that act of ייבום at this point.
Yeah.
Boyachem leshuloim malachai yeshuloim malachai